Good evening, and this is Deacon Joseph Sweden. Just want to say I hope everyone's having a blessed Sunday of the Fast of the Apostles. We are waiting for Bishop Enoch, um, and he is working on his microphone. It's a new computer, so it's understandable that he may be a little delayed, but as soon as he can get in, we're gonna start with that. We're gonna kind of structure this to where we're basically looking at around a 40 to 45-minute presentation, and then any questions that pop up in the chat we will take afterwards. So the title of this episode, and I know it sounds like a really strange title, but that's kind of the way we sometimes do things here. Um, is who makes a better ecumenical patriarch? The ecumenical patriarch or the Moscow patriarch? It sounds like a weird idea when you think about it. I mean, they're very different people, and supposedly they're very different ecclesiological viewpoints. I'm not sure that that's true, though. And when talking to Bishop Enoch, we agreed that this was a pretty good idea in terms of doing a compare and contrast. And so, before we go any further, I just want to say thank you for everyone who has started doing support. If you noticed, our last video we did was an appeal to ask for support. We did get some support. We really appreciate everyone who's been helping us. We're going to keep on building until we can get to the point where we're doing this full time and we're talking about true orthodoxy. We're talking about apologetics. We're talking about the news, and we're doing it on a really regular basis. So, keeping people informed, giving people the gospel. That's what we're kind of aiming for here. Um, as I said, we are waiting on Bishop Enoch, and but until then, I guess I'll give you a little preview of how this all started. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to share my screen here, and I'm going to put up a recent article from NFTU. I'm not going to go into all the details of it. Many of you have already heard about it. This is the recent court case that occurred was about a week or two ago, where the Supreme Court basically rejected Roe Court stance on the case of Bishop or Father Alexander Belia. For those who are not familiar, Father Alexander Belia was a priest of Roe Court who began to claim that he was going to be made a bishop. There were some protests. He fled to Constantinople's jurisdiction, and this is where we get into kind of the meat of what we're going to be talking about today. The Patriarch of Constantinople created something called the Slavic Orthodox Vicariate. And so that was kind of a strange thing that they did there. And I'm going to just put that up on the screen because it seems like it didn't pop up. And so basically, this Slavic Orthodox Vicariate was basically just kind of some kind of excuse to just take in priests from either Rokhor or the Moscow Patriarchate, kind of like an ethnic group subdivision, dare we say, a Russian Rite ecumenical patriarchate group, but it's not much different in practice from the Carpatho Russians or the Ukrainians, who already have their own groups under the EP in the United States. Again, I hate to point this out, but it starts sounding like the Roman Catholic setup of the Ukrainian Rite, the Ruthenian Rite, the Antiochian Melkite Rite. It's a very similar kind of structure where the Pope sits at the head, or the ecumenical patriarchate, in this case, sits at the head. And okay, somebody said the audio is awful. I apologize. Let me see if I can work on that. Let me know. Okay, let me know if the audio hasn't improved on it. I am trying to jack up the audio a little bit. Ultimately, this is part of the reason why I've started asking for support here. Yeah, Mike is crunchy. Okay, I do see that. I'm gonna try to improve this, but this is part of the reason why I hate to say this, that we're asking for support. I can't, these are kind of things that we don't really kind of have the, I guess you could say, the funding for, but we're working on it. And we're gonna keep working on it, but unfortunately, some of these things are not in their current stance fixable. Let me see here. Okay, so let's see how that works. Oh, that's a lot better. Wow. Okay, hold on. Let's see if I can do something here. Got it. Okay, can you all hear me now? Hopefully this is an improvement. Believe it or not, this is actually switching off the headset. As you'll notice, my avatar has changed because that's my Dcn Joseph Sweden account. I'm actually operating off my cell phone, which is sad. Now that I think about it, my computer setup is so poor that my cell phone is actually better. But the good news is I can now actually do my presentation while at the same time uh, I can change screens. So, okay, so let's get the elevator hold music. So let's get back to this. All right, so just to catch up, basically, as I mentioned, the the Ecumenical Patriarchate created this Slavic Orthodox Vicariate. And this is kind of like, for those who couldn't hear me, it was kind of they're creating kind of, it's like just for basically Rokor and MP priests to join the Ecumenical Patriarchate under this vicariate. They also have, of course, as we know, the Carpatho-Russian diocese of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the Ukrainian Autocephalous Church under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. All of these groups are kind of like, as I mentioned, I don't know if you were able to hear me last time, but they're kind of like rites in the Roman Catholic system, like the Ukrainian Rite, the Ruthenian Rite, the Melkite Catholic Rite. The point is that the Ecumenical Patriarchate is basically creating a kind of mini papacy. All of this is uncanonical. If we follow according to the Rudder, every country is supposed to have its own bishops, and those bishops are supposed to be over cities, not 8 bishops overlapping. Fine, that is uncanonical. But the EP literally creating its own little ethnarchies for each ethnic group is not only extreme, but it's basically papism. So the reason why we ask the question, who makes a better ecumenical patriarchate? Does the ecumenical patriarch do it, or does the Moscow patriarch do it? It's very simple. If we look at the example of the Moscow patriarchate, they've been condemning the Constantinople patriarchate for just this very reason. If you give me just a moment, and it goes back to that first without equals sort of teaching. And I've got to look up the apotheosis of Eastern papism, and I will share that instead. So, if we look here, this is an article from Orthodox Christianity that was put up in, it doesn't have a date, but the point is it's quoting from 2018. So the idea is that they're basically condemning the idea that the ecumenical patriarchate can go throughout the world and establish its own churches of different ethnicities, all under the ecumenical patriarchate. Basically, they're arguing that that's a form of papism. And so, if you want to see that article to see that I'm not making this up, I will just put that in the links there and in the comments. You can read that for yourself on your own time, save it, and favorite it. Okay. And okay, now Bishop Enoch just mentioned that he may have fixed the mic. That's fine. Yep. Come on in, Malika. And so, and now I'll get to explain to him exactly what I did with our mic because he's going to be kind of confused seeing this. But anyway, so yeah, basically, that article is arguing that that Constantinople has effectively conceded to papism, which when we get right down to it, even down to the whole separation of rites and vicariates, it looks kind of like an Eastern papism. They're not wrong. So the question becomes, is the Moscow Patriarchate doing any better? The reason why we ask this question, of course, is because of the fact that obviously if they feel that Constantinople is engaging in Eastern papism, they must be offering the Orthodox alternative, or so we would assume. And so let us see here, and this is where I wanted to get to. Let me just here. I've found mostly negative articles on this, and I'm going to have to switch to this because it's mostly negative, but all the articles that were positive towards towards the idea of Russia moving into Alexandrian territory, or the Moscow Patriarchate moving into Alexandrian territory, are kind of missing. Like, there were a couple on orthochristian.ru, but orthochristian.com. I searched up Africa, and then I searched up Alexandria, and I got blanks. The few articles I found blanked out. So the idea that, the Moscow Patriarch, this is from obviously someone hostile to them, says the idea of the Russian Orthodox Church to, quote, conquer Africa is a canonical shot in its own leg. And that's not necessarily wrong. Again, we're taking any questions, comments, etc. At the end of the presentation here, and we're getting, kind of in the middle of that. So the point is this. Moscow began accepting, after the schism between the Ecumenical Patriarch and the Moscow Patriarch, began accepting Alexandrian parishes because the Alexandrian Patriarchate basically said, we're siding with Constantinople. Okay, that's great. So they took in a number of African parishes. It was in the hundreds or even in the thousands of people. And the person that was in charge of it was he was in charge of it temporarily. It was Father George Maximov. Well, here's the issue. The issue is that on the reasoning that they gave for justifying the separation from Constantinople was Canon 15 of the First Second Council. Now, I don't know if you've watched either of our debates or you've seen our discussions on Canon 15 of the First Second Council, but that's basically when your bishop is a heretic, you are supposed to leave. Okay, it's trying to sell me something. Yes, support us, Risu. We could use the support too. So anyway, the point is that the argument they made was Canon 15 of the First Second Synod, saying that effectively they had a right to take in these African parishes on the basis that they were fleeing heresy, or at least in the case of Father George's argument that they were fleeing schism, which is not what the canon says. Because even if you use the argument they were fleeing schism because Alexandria was staying with Constantinople, you would have to ask, what's the schism over? Well, supposedly it would be over the heresy of Constantinople. One minor problem with that. As we look at the structure of what they have set up in Alexandria, they have effectively set up Russian dioceses on the territory of Alexandria, a church that has literally existed since the beginnings of the church, since the first centuries of Christianity. And I'm not even talking about the argument whether they fell to ecumenism or not. Let's not even touch it. We're looking at this from the Ecumenical Patriarchate versus Moscow Patriarchate's perspective. And from their perspective, Alexandria was just fine until 2018. However, once we hit to 2018 and they are separated, if they are separated on the basis of heresy, it becomes incumbent on the patriarch that is rescuing the Alexandrians to give them another hierarchy, more specifically to eventually lead to the creation of another patriarchate of Alexandria if the first one has become apostate. They're not doing this, however. Effectively, what they're doing is they're just making the Russian church bigger. So they're just assigning African dioceses. Same thing with Asia. Are they working towards making that independent? No, they're just making bigger Russian dioceses everywhere. Effectively, that is the flip side of the Roman Catholic Church. When we don't look at the Eastern side, we look at the Latin side. It's just everyone shall accept Russian Orthodoxy. So it has basically taken the position of almost the Latin Church, in which everyone's just going to be under Russian Orthodoxy. They're the only ones left, and their dioceses are the only ones that matter. Once you're taking that position, you're not really that different from Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. As a matter of fact, one could say that you're just a different aspect of the Roman Catholicism that he's trying to ape. So ultimately, one would think that if the Moscow Patriarchate was in fact trying to demonstrate that that their system, for lack of a better word, was canonical and operating in the way that the Orthodox Church historically should, as opposed to the innovations of Constantinople, it would have to look something more like actually trying to reestablish the Church of Alexandria, as opposed to creating a bunch of African Russian dioceses. Because of that, we're forced to have to admit that ultimately, if the Ecumenical Patriarchate is bad, the Moscow Patriarchate as an alternative, at least for these African and Asian communities, is equally as bad. They're both doing the same exact thing, which is aping Rome. Unfortunately, that's not canonical. It's not the way it's supposed to be done. It's not fair to the Africans or the Asians. We don't even want to talk about the OCU. Actually, let me see if I can find that article, because that was a big shocker. Because right now, there was this discussion that the OCU is a creation of the CIA and the Ecumenical Patriarchate, all of which I agree with. And basically, it's based off of the UAOC. And Moscow is trying to save the legitimate and the canonical Orthodox Church in Ukraine, which would be the UOC under Metropolitan Onufry, which was originally it was originally an autonomous church under Moscow, but at least it was autonomous. And then it turns out that that wasn't true either. So now the most recent news that we have coming out of Moscow, and this is what I am trying to pull up now, if I can just get it. Let me see. Give me a moment. Okay, this is taking a little bit long. Okay, let me see if that works. Yes, here we go. Okay, so we're going to go here, and then we're going to switch the screen. And this was shocking, but this is this week, and this was, happened just before Prigozhin did his crazy thing in Russia and tried, ended up doing a fake coup and all that fun stuff. But if you look here, the latest news coming out of Moscow on this is the following, where we have this. This is the Metropolitan Leonid of Klin. He's the exarch for Africa. See what I mean? He's a Russian exarch for Africa. But his argument was that the Russian Orthodox Church, as they take over areas, as the Russians take over areas in Ukraine, should then be restored to being Russian dioceses. Notice here, it is not actually saying we're going to take them back under their obedience. We're going to put the canonical hierarchy of the UOC in. He's saying we're just going to put back Russian dioceses right on top, which I assume would be bad for even the people who you call, or who, people in the official church call the canonical Orthodox Church of Ukraine. It's not good for them either. So the point is, once again, even in Ukraine, where supposedly they're supposed to be guarding the canons and supposed to be helping all these people, in actual fact, they're going to take that over and make those Russian dioceses as well. I am including a link to that in the chat. So if you want to see that yourself, because I know that that's kind of a bit of a shocker, but here we are. So ultimately, when it comes right down to it, you have two choices. You have the Ecumenical Patriarch acting like papists, or you have the Moscow Patriarch acting like papists. But the truth of the matter is, neither of them are very different. Neither of these situations are being governed by the canons, but by politics and caprices. If you want to follow what the canons say on that, well, let's be consistent and follow the truly canonical churches. That would be the true Orthodox. And start looking at how we can rebuild what's basically occurred over the past 100 years of ecumenical folly. We're seeing what we know as world orthodoxy collapsing in on itself effectively. It's a free-for-all. And the point is, it's an awful shame. But this is the reality, and all we can do is start acting like Christians, get ourselves in a true Orthodox church, and try to help people. Because ultimately, there are true Orthodox in all these countries, but they're largely uninvolved in this fighting, mostly because of the fact that it's not about they're not about taking sides in the building of the new world order. It's a silly thing to even think about. The church is the foundation, and has to be the foundation of any past, present, or future society. Without it, it's apocalypse. It's what we're asking for. And I think a lot of people are like, yeah, that's what's going to happen. It's I don't believe that. I just think that the globalists that are in cassocks and with big funky hats are telling you they're the church. And I think they're giving you all the evidence in the world not to believe them. With that said, this is only another proof. Just seeing that the truth is the Moscow Patriarchate behaves just as much in a papist manner as the Ecumenical Patriarchate means that neither of them is a very good option. Maximus writes, internationalists grinding up Christians and fighting over the spoils. You're absolutely right. But the problem is there are people who are helping them ultimately. Ultimately, whether we talk about that we could talk about the globalists or who's in charge, but when you're talking about people like Patriarch Bartholomew, or you're talking about even people like Patriarch Kirill, unfortunately, you're talking about people who are operating within a paradigm where the globalists of different countries are working for their own interests. And unfortunately, the hierarchies of world orthodoxy are working in consonance with those interests and to help further those interests, whether for money, whether on principle. I have no doubt that Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew truly believes in some of the globalist goals, considering he sounds like one of these environmentalist Greenpeace psychopaths. I have no doubt of that. But the point is that some of it's not so principled and some of it is mostly self-interest and power. So let me see if there are any comments or questions. Feel free to throw those in now. This was not a very long episode so far. I was assuming Bishop Enoch would be here. He's still having issues. He may not, at this point, he may not be here till the next episode, but we'll see. We will see. And while we're doing that, I do want to talk about the next thing that we're going to be doing, and we're going to be doing that hopefully on Odyssey. And give me just a moment. One of the most popular questions I have gotten this is something that we will be devoting an episode to, and it'll probably be an Odyssey only episode. Give me just a moment, and I'm going to pull one up right now. Okay, I'm just going to share this. Okay, we got that. Let's see if it's up there. It is, and this is going to be probably the next episode that we're going to do. We do have the big episode that we are planning towards the end of July. We've been moving it, not for any other reason than because we've just been busy with a lot of stuff. But the Crimes of the Greek New Calendarists, that is a real episode, and we're going to be doing that. We're going to cover a lot of the horrible things that happened to the true Orthodox in Greece and the violence and murderousness of the New Calendarist hierarchy, etc. We're not doing How to Do Typica today, by the way. This is going to be for the next episode. But basically going through the practice of Typica. One of the things that I have noticed since we have started really reaching out to people is that they say, what do we do? Okay, and I do see a question. I'm going to get to that right after we answer. What do we do when there's no true Orthodox Church around? Here's the answer. All Orthodox Christians knew this, by the way, at the turn of the century. Before ecumenism took over, all Orthodox Christians knew that there are parts of the service that only a priest can do, and there are parts of the service that everyone else can do. The Typica and the hours are all those other parts. And even without a priest, you can do a fairly complete set of services with your family and friends, with people that care about Orthodoxy, with other Orthodox. If you're in an isolated area, you can get together and you can actually do these services. This is part of the reason, and I'm not going to get into a long discussion of the old believers, but this is part of the reason why the old believers were able to survive for so long, because historically there's this kind of preset amount of data and services and prayers and tones you can say with your family at home, and you don't even need to make it to the church, which if the church isn't there, it's not an issue of need, you just can't do it. And so let me see here. So that is something that we will be working on very soon, and hopefully we will have a new episode, God willing, by next week on that. And so this is, let me just go here and let's see here. I'm going to take that off and I'm going to stop sharing here. So I'm going to get to see any questions, although it does look like, let me see here. Okay, and so let me see. So Sava the Saint asks, I do have a question, though it might be better for Vladika Enoch. If this is going to be a really thick, deep dive historical question, yes, it's probably better for him. I'm not even going to lie to you. How about the historical Russian Orthodox Church on the Georgian and Romanian churches after the occupations there, or the Ecumenical Patriarch with Bulgaria? Um, the world Orthodox today will use those as examples to justify Orthodox papism. By historical ROC, I'm not referring to the modern Moscow Patriarchate, but you mean prior to the revolution, as far as Russia after the invasion of Georgia and Moldova, Wallachia. I'm trying to see what you're getting here. I guess what you're getting is the world Orthodox will use those as examples to justify Orthodox papism. I mean, again, I'm not Bishop Enoch, but if you just look at the controversy around the Council of 1872, which condemned Philitism, but at the same time was almost, because of the way the EP was set up in Bulgaria, was almost self-refuting. To be quite honest, I don't know that those are I don't think, at least with Bulgaria, that's necessarily a good example. Um, Certainly, it wasn't justified in that sense. But the EP, in that, unfortunately, you can find that there were these problems did not start in 1920. They really began in the mid 1800s. But as long as they were related to the question of jurisdiction, they kind of took a backseat to other matters, particularly because the Orthodox world was increasingly becoming chaotic. So in that sense, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily good examples, but I think that the bigger question is, are they in line with the canons? And this is just the way I would answer this. Um, do the canons justify what Constantinople did in Bulgaria? And no, it didn't. Do the canons justify what happened with Georgia and Romania? That's a tricky. First off, these are all tricky questions because the borders of all these countries. We're dealing with the aftermath of the Ottoman Empire. We're dealing with the fact that these countries have sometimes been suppressed. So it's not just it's not as simple as the EP or the MP has a right to go there. That's just because something happened doesn't mean it's right or canonical. That's part of the reason why we use the canons, is because the canons help guide us. Otherwise, if we look for every bad example, and this occurred, one thing I'll tell you about, this occurred in the first debate I was having. Somebody was making the argument about things that occurred that are recorded in Ware's Eustratios Ardenti, which is a book that talks about during the post-Union period of domination under the Ottomans, that certain Greek bishops, for example, secretly signed unions with Rome. This became a justification on the part of the world Orthodox critic to say, well, if they were able to do that then we should be able to do that now. No, those things were condemned then, but they were in secret. And when those things were found out, they were often condemned publicly because they were uncanonical. Bad things happening in church history is not an excuse to do bad things again. It's a reason to study church history. And this is one of the bigger problems that we run into, and why I'm so big on everyone learning history, even the very basics. Because if you don't, you can easily be lied to, and you can easily be swayed and convinced. Another episode that I probably want to do this week is dealing with the stuff that was put out regarding the debate on Canon 15, dealing with David Erhan. I reviewed that case because I thought in our second debate on the Crucible that I would be dealing with the case of Nestorius, and we reviewed some of the historical texts. But then when I reviewed David Erhan's statement, he basically says, well, in the case of Nestorius, it shows that you can be in communion with a heretical patriarch and causes no problems. First off, historically, that's completely wrong. Now, I'm going to make an entire episode for this, but ultimately, if you take apart the fact that that's not what happened with the people and that's not what happened with the bishops, he was lying. But I realize that a lot of people lie when it comes to history. So you can't take when somebody does the whataboutism, the how about this happening, look at the background and then look at the canons and ask, is that the right thing to do? usually history shakes out pretty well in terms of answering things canonically, especially when you're dealing with cases like this. And so my suggestion would be definitely don't apply a situation that was already bad and uncanonical to the present and say that's how we should do it, because that's a very bad methodology to use. I hope that that's a satisfactory answer. If it's not, I apologize, and well, hopefully Bishop Enoch will be on later to assist with that. But otherwise, that's my basic point on that, and I'm sure Enoch, he has a lot more of the historical background and history behind it. But I think the basic principle that don't take bad things that happen in history as precedents to justify present things in history is a pretty good basic principle. Let me see if there are any other questions. Let's see here. Okay, this is mostly about how my phone sounds better than my headset, which I understand. Let me see. Any other questions? Okay, no, that's not. That's kind of a. Let me see here. Like button stamped out like a true Orthodox. No idea what that means. Okay, checking. No, it doesn't look like there are any new questions. There's a new question or a new comment. Let me see here. Okay, no problem. Sava, in that case, not a problem. Okay, so I see we're in our 35th minute. Quite honestly, okay, that's an interesting question. So somebody says, what is your stance on the GOCK? I'm not sure what you mean by stance. They're Orthodox. I know a lot of people in the GOCK. They're great. Can you be more specific? If you can be more specific, I'd be glad to clarify, because they're true Orthodox. They have great YouTube channels, particularly the monastery. They actually do a cycle of services live on YouTube. I've shared them sometimes in my community. Let me see. Why don't you join them? That's an interesting question. Fun fact, I almost did join them. But and that was circumstantial. But no, I did, it's a weird question, because if I'm part of a different synod, say for example, and I'm part of the autonomous metropolia, and I have been for a long time, like 15 years, with the exception of the year and a half or so that I was separated from Metropolitan John. There's no canonical reason. If your bishop isn't a heretic, a clergyman doesn't have a legitimate justification to leave. Unlike lay people, if you were like, I like this GOCK parish better and it was down the block, if the priest received you, how he received you, I wouldn't know. It varies, depends on priest. It's basically fine. I don't know what to tell you on that. That's a personal preference. But when you are made clergy, you are under obedience to the bishop, specifically under almost like an oath, for lack of a better word. And so basically, I can't just leave. Nobody can just leave. Like, for example, I know clergy in most true Orthodox jurisdictions in this country, and yeah, sure, they want to work better towards unity, and they're friends. We all mostly get along. But when people start going, well, why don't you join this bishop or that? Usually the answer is because I already have a bishop. It doesn't make sense. But yeah, I like the GOCK. I'm not going to tell anyone not to go there. They're great. And if there's a parish near you, I recommend it. We do our thing. They're not a big fan of Western Rite, but then again, neither is anyone else in true Orthodoxy. But that's that's another reason too, because I'm a really big fan of priests and Western Rite. I'm not using it currently, but I do know how, and I've used it for many years. So I have a great love for it. But that's something that's just not of interest to most true Orthodox in the country. And that's not just the GOCK, it's literally everyone, except us. So let me see here. Okay, how, Blind G-Tech, and thank you for the question, I'll keep going. How is the fostering of unity between the true Orthodox, genuine Orthodox jurisdictions? It's difficult, you have to understand that we are all coming from a place of suspicion. If you look in the 1990s, at basically how the situation was. There was virtually no trust versus almost anyone by the late 1990s. Everybody was separated and out of communion with each other. Everyone knew each other too. That was the worst part, but there was so much suspicion. Um, Things are a lot better than they were 20 years ago. For example, I know with the GOCK, for example, they're in communion with Metropolitan Anglifango. Now, Metropolitan Anglifango lost a lot of his parishes in America because they went with Archbishop Andronic. They went into communion with the True Orthodox Church of Serbia. The question of whether that says or not, the Russian question, I don't even touch that. Basically, because of UCon's 362, issued by Patriarch Tikhon in 1920, any bishop really in a Russian True Orthodox synod can effectively self-govern if he has to. So I think that's I'm not even touching that. I don't want to get into the history of Russian jurisdictions. I'd love to have Father Mark on from ROAC on. I know that there's a couple of people who are here from ROAC, and so definitely I'd love to discuss the Russian situation. I'd also like to discuss the Greek situation. Okay, so let me see the next question. Thanks, Father. So what is stopping your synod from entering communion with the GOCK? Well, we are in communion with the GOC of Metropolitan Angelos of Avlona. That we've been in communion with them since 2011. Milan actually entered into communion with them first. And then that communion, when Milan fell, went to us, and we've been in communion with them ever since. Now, the GOC of Avlona, Metropolitan Angelos, and now it's Metropolitan Cherubim of Avlona, basically kind of separated from they went from the Cypriotites to the Macarians, and then separated from the Macarians and kind of stayed on their own as a diocese and kept building. And we have a bishop in America. If you've heard of Bishop Irenaeus of Texas, that is actually our Greek bishop in Texas. But on that end, we do not enter into discussions, for example, with the Greeks, because we have our own Greeks. Do they talk? Do all the Greek synods talk in Greece? Absolutely. We hear all the stuff that goes on secondhand from our Greeks in different, areas. So everyone kind of has their own little windows of communication, little communications bubbles, sort of things, diplomatic cables, if you want to call them that. But yeah, so that's why we're in communion with a GOC synod that if they work out their issues with the GOCK, then that will lead to questions for us and what we're going to do. But I think as long as I think Western Rite is always going to be something that's going to come up. So that I think is going to be something that's, I think we're in a situation right now where we're happy with our communion. I think they're happy with their communion, and that's a lot of people in communion, so we're kind of good. Aaron Cecina asks, Father, have you, Bishop Enoch, ever thought about reviewing any of the catechetical books the World Orthodox have put out? I'm thinking books like Thinking Orthodox. We have not really. And because, again, now this is going to change, obviously, I think, as we continue to start doing appeals and asking for funding. We can start reviewing books, because for review books, you have to buy books, and new books, you don't really need new books to kind of live an Orthodox life. But to just keep in touch with the news and do reviews and stuff like that, yeah, we're going to need to start buying books, expenses. We're already at a loss. We're trying to build on that. So it would be an interesting thing, like reviewing stuff like Clark Halton's stuff, or I don't know what this Thinking Orthodox book is. I assume it's a book about phronema. Maybe it's like Phronema for Dummies or something. I have no idea. But we'll see. I'll look it up, and I'll see what I can say about it, even though I haven't read it. Hello, Wasna. And then Sava, are you there? And it's okay. Sava says, one more question, another loaded question of history. I apologize. Oh, no problem. I love loaded questions of history, can't you tell? I've heard anyway there were saints who were suspicious of the Patriarch of Constantinople being granted the title of Ecumenical Patriarch. Was this a time of what was being developed in the West around the same time of Universal Bishop? Oh, that's interesting that you asked that, because it was actually St. Gregory the Great, St. Gregory Dialogos, who wrote most strongly against St. John the Faster when the title Ecumenical Patriarch was first introduced. Because of the way Greek translated into Latin, St. Gregory was under the impression that the title Ecumenical Patriarch meant universal bishop, and wrote at length. He wrote a couple of letters at length explaining why this is a disgusting title, because it denigrates the authority that's given to all bishops. So yeah, in a sense, that has That has been the case. Okay, it does look like Bishop Enoch is going to have to get a new microphone. Remember, if you want to help support Bishop Enoch's goals in on as well, if you can go to our Subscribe Star or if you go to our Odyssey link, you can actually support him directly and help pay for that microphone. But he did right; he does have a faulty microphone. He has to get a new one, so that's that. Give me just a moment. Oh, here. We're going to finish up the questions. And then, okay. And so, yeah, that was actually a fear that St. Gregory did state. So those letters are worth getting your hands on. And they can be found in the Christian Classics Ethereal Library Fathers Collection, which is free on the internet. That book specifically talks about looking up stuff online or trusting the true Orthodox as though they refuse to name the true Orthodox. You can tell what she's talking about. Okay, I'm gonna start by just answering this with one handy thing. One thing I learned in talking to some of the good new people that I talked to and getting kind of a more recent experience of what world Orthodoxy is like, I found that everyone has a like a fear of the Rudder. The Rudder is a standard Orthodox text of the canons, and not only is it a standard Orthodox text of the canons, it is one that is so important to understand, and I'm going to include a link to it, by the way, so everyone here can get their own copy of the Rudder. It is through Scribd. Give me just a moment. But the whole point is, the Rudder is the canons of the church, and many people have been taught in world Orthodoxy they should be terrified and afraid of the Rudder. It's not a book you should use. They talk about it like it's almost a Necronomicon, which is pretty gross and disgusting because it's a holy book, and I'm actually going to put some of it on the screen, but I want to show you something particularly interesting from it. And so give me just a moment while I share it. Hold on, please. So this is a copy of the Rudder that's I just put a link to. This is the Master John edition. The Master John edition is basically it's the translation of Saint Nicodemus, and you have to know a little bit about your history of how the Rudder came about in English. Came from a guy named Apostolus Macracus. His kind of publishing house put an English translation of the Rudder. Unfortunately, they also, after St. Nicodemus's commentary, they also included Apostolus Macracus's himself commentary, which was questionable, sometimes heretical. The Master John edition, which came out in, I believe it was like 1990 or something, when they did it, they literally did an English translation that they did electronically, that they took out all the extra Apostolus Macracus commentary, leaving only St. Nicodemus. Why am I putting this up on the screen? This is the introduction, by the way. There's no canons here in this part. This is, okay, so yeah, it was reprinted, 2005. Oh, no, it looks like it might have been, okay, yeah, the reprint was 83, and then the extraneous sections were removed in 2005. Okay, anyway, so the point is this is a very useful introduction. But the reason I'm putting this on the screen is because if we look here, that would be not Saint Nicodemus's introduction, but that would be the translator's introduction. And then this is a dedication from I believe it was the Patriarch, I think. No, that was from Saint Nicodemus. Here, there's an endorsement page, which is written by the Ecumenical Patriarch at the time, where it talks about how useful this is to everybody in terms of having, the knowledge of the canons available to all Orthodox Christians. And this was written by Father Agapios and Monk Nicodemus. And so this is the letter of Patriarch Neophytus VII of Constantinople. And as you'll notice, this is most interesting. It says, during our first patriarch, this very canonicon was offered to us, newly printed through Agapios, a most erudite Peloponnesian, with the object of having a revised edition of it published for the benefit of Orthodox Christians. We accordingly communicated the facts relating to the book of the most holy bishops then in residence in session.
All but 2 of them consented. Only Sir Gerasimos, the former Patriarch of Constantinople, who has now come to a blissful end, but who was then Archbishop of Dercy, together with him Meletios, the former Archbishop of Larissa, though acceding to the revision of the book, balked at the publication of a printed edition, arguing that the canonica of the Church ought not to be published in popular speech, lest the contents of the holy canons become familiar to the common people. But when we counter-argued that if in such were the case, the holy canons ought not to be published in the Greek language to begin with, since it was a spoken language of that period in use among laborers and handicraftsmen, their argument proved ineffectual. Accordingly, at our instance, and with the consent of all the holy bishops, it was synodically decided that the book should be revised. Wherefore, the revision of it was entrusted to the most learned and erudite teacher of preacher of the great Church of Christ, Sir Dorotheus, as one conversant with the holy canons and distinguished for his extensive learning and virtuousness, who, upon revising the book entrusted to him, immediately handed it back to us and stated he had found nothing objectionable in it, but a few easily corrected errors of the translators of the canons. And so the entire point is that this book, the Rudder itself, was meant to be intentionally for everybody. So when you hear clergy say things like it's not for everybody, it's not for the church, it's only for the bishops, that's a lie. It's just a lie, and you're being lied to. You shouldn't listen to things. When you hear that, you should be concerned. And so let me see here. Okay, I don't know who the author of that book is. And amazing. Oh, so instead of giving people the Rudder, instead of giving them bread, they're giving them a stone. They give them propaganda. And so hopefully that helps. Yeah, Wazna says, my previous priest discouraged us and told us we couldn't read the Rudder because it's for bishops only. Yeah, now you know the truth. It's in the introduction. The Rudder is so important that the World Orthodox do not print it anymore. Not an issue. As you can see, there's a link right here. Click on it. You may have to use a sign in, but the point is you can download it for free. I do have one last question, says Saba. I'm starting to sound like Columbo, however. Since I won't have the chance to ask, who is this metropolitan mark of the genuine Orthodox metropolis? Former African Matthewite C. I don't know. I'm gonna be honest. I like if they're in the United States and they have parishes, I'll try to look up who they are. Not everybody who says that they're genuine Orthodox, I have found this out, is actually genuine Orthodox. And this has been true for years. Because what will happen is like you'll find these independent group guys and they'll be like, oh, I'm not getting any traction. They can't convince anyone that they're World Orthodox, but they can try to see if they can say that they are genuine Orthodox. So I don't know who this metropolitan mark is. Former African man, that really strikes me as odd. He was a metropolitan with the Matthewites in Africa, because I know of only one bishop of the Matthewites in Africa. That's Matthew of Kenya, and that's it. So who is Metropolitan Mark? I've never heard of him. I don't know where is his synod? Like, if I could figure out where he's from, I don't know that he's actually with this group. I don't know where he came from. No, they don't like laity to know the canons because that makes them accountable to the canons, and that's the one thing they don't want. And the ecumenists don't want the laity to see all the wrong things they're doing. You're not wrong there. All right. We've got about 5 more minutes if anyone has questions. If not, we can always close up early. But as you can see, I hope I've answered all the questions that we have. As I mentioned, Bishop Enoch will probably have to be on the next episode. And so hopefully, that'll be a good one actually, because we can actually go through different kinds of Typica and different things. But the point is, we also have the big story, which of course is going to be the crimes of the new calendarist, which we will be doing towards the end of July. The Greek new calendarist, I shouldn't say, not all the new calendarist. We're specifically dealing with a specific period in history, the early period of the true Orthodox Church of Greece, and that should be good. And then let me see here. He wasn't a metropolitan with the Matthewites. He was made a metropolitan, self-appointed later. Okay, no one gets self-appointed. First off, it takes bishops to make a bishop, and no one can be a metropolitan without being a bishop. Was he a bishop with the Matthewites? If he was not a bishop with the Matthewites, the question is who made him a bishop? So on and so forth. Let me see here. Bourbon or Scotch? Neither. I mean, if I had to choose, I would say bourbon's cheaper, but it's also better in terms of not dealing with like Scotch. You start dealing with multi distillations and gets more and more expensive. Bourbon's a little more expensive at the start, but then it tops off. Have any of you heard of the World Orthodox doing anything about the recent OCA document? Oh, that one. Yeah, there was an OCA document where basically they kind of enshrined ecumenism in their thinking and said like Judaism was another path to God, and they just got Jesus wrong. No, I haven't heard of anyone doing anything about that. I assume that they're just assuming no one's paying attention because in World Orthodoxy, no one is. They're turning a blind eye to it. So I know that there were people like this Roquefort MP Subdeacon Nectarios who sounded the alarm, and look where that got. Nowhere. Nothing happened. That's exactly what happens when you fight from within. Nothing. Let me see here. Sava says bourbon. I concur. But in any case, so if there are any other questions, comments, etc., because we are now hitting minute 56 and we can close out early. If not, otherwise we can say goodbye and we'll talk later. I do want to mention I will be putting up I'm gonna get a pre-recorded thing at the end like they have on those other YouTube shows, like where it'll be like, oh, we're appealing here, follow our subscribe star and the Odyssey links and stuff like that. Like, it'll all just be pre-recorded at the end, and I can just press a button, and that'll be good. But yeah, if you can contribute for our subscribe star, or contribute through Odyssey. Some people ask, can I do crypto? Thanks to our crypto donor. And yes, you can. Just let us know. I don't have the pages for this set up yet. I don't have the appeal on the website yet set up yet, but do go to nftu.net. I am going to be putting this episode up as an article, and I am going to be putting the appeal up as an article, and we're going to be doing all sorts of other things so that we can get better stuff, and to make better stuff, not just get stuff. We want to make better stuff and get more equipment, get a better message out there, improve the quality. I think there's a lot we can do. Aaron writes, that OCA document was a death knell for them. Something tells me the patient will live. Unfortunately, is it an Orthodox patient? No, but anyway. I believe there are documents in Russian in the MP that sound exactly the same as the OCA one. I don't think they care that much. You're probably not wrong. If you look at the stuff from the DECR, the Department of External Church Relations from the MP, they're still doing ecumenist stuff. Just last week, in the past week, it was like Wednesday, Patriarch is like celebrating the 75th anniversary of the World Council of Churches. They haven't changed. As much as we can talk about Roquefort MP, when you're talking about the MP part, that's exactly the same as it was before 2007. It simply hasn't changed. The introduction of the new martyrs was in 2001, largely because it was getting out of their hands. People were venerating the new martyrs in Russia because of the Roquefort glorification. So they had to jump in there and co-opt it. And then Blind G Tech says, should I not be donating through PayPal? No, you are absolutely welcome to donate through PayPal. I will say this though, even though, again, I'm not going to complain. I'll take PayPal donations. I'm a big fan of any donations. But PayPal takes out a pretty chunky fee, just so you know. But I'll take it. It's fine. Because I want to make it easier for people to help us, not make it harder. The OCA will end up going in the way of the Episcopal Church, which not sure that's living. Well, I don't mean living in terms of having the Holy Spirit. I mean living in terms of it'll be an organization. The Roman Catholic Church exists, but it just isn't the church. And it could be the Episcopal Church too. Our Archbishop Elpidoporus seems to like going to the Episcopal Church all the time now, at least once a year. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. So again, thank you everyone for helping through every method, whether PayPal or Odyssey or crypto or thank you. We can't do this without you. I mean, we've tried to do this without help. It's cost us a lot more money. Blind G Tech asks, which method of donating takes out the least? I don't know because I'm really new at this. So what I will say is that I'll try to figure that out by next time. And when I make the cool little video ending, that probably won't be that cool. But it'll at least say which is the cheapest way. But let me see here. I might have some spare laptops sitting around. Should I send some to you, Enoch? Would that be a help? Honestly, if they're like kind of older laptops, probably not. I have a lot of those. I have a lot of older and kind of arcane equipment, which is why I'm a Linux user. The truth of the matter, like to build church AI, which is something I really want to do as a project, I can't. The processor's too old. It needs to be Core i3 or newer. So there's some stuff that we have planned, big things, to really advance the mission of the church, and I'm gonna just need to get newer equipment. As much as even if it's cheap, it still needs to be newer. So that's just something. But yeah, I appreciate it. Maybe I mean we can always donate it to other people who need computers. And then South Padre Tony says XMR no fees. That's true. Crypto donations generally don't have fees. He's a big Monero fan. XMR stands for Monero. It's an ultra secure crypto that uses a unique code base. And then Maximus said, you had me at Linux user. Well, yes. How do you think we run old computers? Anyway, it's either that or getting a bootleg copy of Windows 98. And I don't live in Russia anymore. Yeah. Well, maybe then, Sava, please keep talking. I might be able to, if they're Core i3 Plus, I might be able to actually use that. Thank you. And we'd really appreciate it. Okay. So we are now at 1:02. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We appreciate it. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for being there on this long, it's not too long, it's only 30 days this year, this long fast, and listening to me talk without help, even though Bishop Enoch will hopefully be here for the next episode. So it was just me yammering on for an hour. But thank you again. Well, I appreciate that, but I use an all-in-one, and I'm afraid to break it. But and I'm not the guy who opens the computers, and I don't want to give my wife more work. But we'll see. I've got some thoughts. Anyway, but yeah, we appreciate all the help you give, even if it's just prayers. Please, we like those too. We need everything we can because the time has come where more and more people are becoming interested in true Orthodoxy, and we've got to be able to put our best foot forward every time. We've got to be able to show people the beauty of the gospel. And if there's, I mean, I don't have anything else for today, but you'll be seeing me soon. We'll be doing another show soon, and hopefully we'll be getting one on Odyssey about that Typica. And for everyone else, well, for everyone listening, thank you. Have a good night. Take care, and may this be a productive fast for us all.